What if you finally knew how to use Git and GitHub in your coding projects instead of feeling like you're missing a critical piece of the puzzle? In this video, I'm going to break down 17 important Git commands into simple language anyone can understand so that you feel confident. We'll start with an overview, get into the essentials, and progressively get more complex, and even cover how to use Claude Code to help you execute commands for you. If you're tired of feeling confused on where Git fits into your workflow, this video is for you. Now, before we get into this first command, git init, I want to make sure that you understand that Git is not necessarily the same thing as GitHub. So Git is a command line tool. GitHub is a cloud hosted version of Git. So I've got the No Code Architects Toolkit that is a Git repository that is hosted on the cloud. That way I can work locally on my computer. I can upload it here. You can work locally on your computer and you can download it here. You can push it back here and I can pull your changes back down to my Git repository. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of people will never ever use this because they're always just pulling down or cloning, and we're going to talk about that here. But a lot of people always just clone an existing repository. They never create their own, or sometimes they might create their own on GitHub first, and then they clone it, and they never actually use Git init. But if I'm on the command line here, and let's say I create a new folder, make directory git demo, and then I cd git demo. If I do git init, I just converted this empty directory into a Git repository. If you do not know how to get Git installed locally on your computer, make sure just to come to Claude and say, how do I install Git on my Mac or PC? Right? And it's going to explain exactly how you do it. And it might even give you a couple of different options, option 1, option 2. And you just go through this and then you'll have it locally on your computer. So now I have just turned this empty directory into a Git repository. Now there's nothing in it. If I do a git status, it says on branch master, no commits yet, nothing to commit. There's nothing in here. It's empty, but it is a Git repository. If I were to come down here and do git and do make directory git demo 2, make directory git demo 2, and then cd into that directory and do a git status, it's going to say this is not a Git repository. So I just point that out so that you understand that Git is first and foremost a command line tool, and it is not GitHub. In fact, there's other platforms like Bitbucket, which is also a cloud hosted Git solution. And there's also GitLab, I believe, which is just another one. GitHub just happens to be the first and most popular. So now let's talk about Git clone, because I think a lot of people are more familiar with this because they're pulling down a Git repository from GitHub. So all this is doing is it's making a copy of a repository on Git. So here we have the No Code Architects Toolkit. So if I were to come here to code and go to HTTPS and copy this to the clipboard, and then I were to come back to the terminal, I already have a directory called the No Code Architects Toolkit. So I'm going to go ahead and make another directory. Just call it playground, so I have a place to play without messing with anything else. If I were to type git clone and then paste in this URL here, it's simply going to pull down the No Code Architects Toolkit. If I do a ls, we're going to see the toolkit there. I can go into it, and now we have a copied version of the NCA toolkit locally on my computer. And I can do a git status, and we can see I'm on the main branch, and we'll talk more about branching. Don't worry about that. But now we have a local clone copy of the remote repository from GitHub. Now, of course, you could always download a zip. If you were using GitHub desktop, you could use that as well. I prefer to use the command line tool. I've actually never used the desktop version. But one thing I want to point out here is that you can see is that there's a few other options here. So we used HTTPS, but there's also this SSH here. Now, when you're downloading or cloning a public repository, you can go ahead and just use the HTTPS. It's not going to require any authentication. But when you are downloading a private repository, maybe one that you own that is not public, right? This No Code Architects Toolkit is available to the public, but I also have many repositories here that are not. So we come here, we can come to repositories. You can see I have the SAS here I'm working on. Now, if I were to come in here and I were to grab this link, the HTTPS, copy it, and come back to the terminal, go back to the playground. If I were to type git clone and this, well, it's going to ask for my username and password for GitHub. Now, I don't traditionally like to use my username and password. In fact, my GitHub account is connected up with Google Auth. And so typically this just isn't the best method using HTTPS to download a private repository. But in order to use the other method here, SSH, you do have to use SSH keys. So I want to briefly show you how to do that because this is an important thing. And I also want to show you too, these are things that I often forget how to do. I don't do them every day. So never hesitate to jump over to Claude, and I'm using Whisperflow so I can dictate. I'm trying to create some SSH keys for GitHub so I can authenticate and download. Can you give me the instructions on a Mac on how I can create SSH keys and then how to install them, the public key in my GitHub account so that I can use it? And I'll go ahead and explain what this is. But essentially, we're about to create a secret key. We're going to create a private key and a public key. And these two are paired together. And the cool thing is we can share the public key. We're going to keep this one private. We're not going to share the private key, but we can use this public key. We can upload it to GitHub. And then using our private key, we can automatically authenticate with or without a password. And I'll show you that. And connect to our GitHub account and clone repositories, our own repositories. We can push and pull, and I'll show you all those commands in a second. But we do need to create these SSH keys. And this is something that you'll use in other systems as well, if you get into computers and you do a lot of this kind of thing. So all we need to do here is copy this. I'm going to jump to the terminal. I'm going to exit out of this command here that was asking for username and password. I'm going to go ahead and just paste that. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and I'm going to go ahead and accept the default. So it's going to put this key here in my default SSH folder here. Now I happen to already have a key here, so I'm just going to create something different, call it demo. So now it's going to ask for a passphrase. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to secure your key so that anytime you try to use it, it's going to ask you this passphrase. Most security experts are going to tell you to put in a passphrase, that it's not secure, because if anybody is able to get access to your private key, they can access anything that is using your public key, okay? If you don't have a passphrase here, then anybody that gets access to this can access any system that you've ever used where you put your public key there. So make sure you use a passphrase. So I'm just going to type, and then it's going to ask for it again. Okay, now it created those keys. So I have another terminal here where I'm in my .ssh folder. If you're on a Mac and you're in your home directory, if you go cd.ssh and then you do an ls, it's not showing up there, likely because what happened was when it asked me what file I want to save it to and I just put this, it's likely just in this playground directory because I didn't copy this part here. I only typed this. So if I imagine if I type ls, it's going to be right there. Yeah. So in this case, it just created it in this directory here. So now to get this to work, I'm first going to move these to my SSH directory, move star to tilde. Whenever you put that little tilde there, it means your home directory, /.ssh. I'll go cd tilde /.ssh. And now you can see we have our keys here. Now real quick, because by default, it's going to use these whenever I use my keys, I'm going to quickly rename those. I'm going to move ID to change me back and move ID.pub to ID.pub.change me back. You won't need to do this. And then I'm going to rename my demo keys so that they don't have that. Move ID to just ID, and then move ID to ID.pub. So now if I do an ls, these two keys here are the ones that I just created right now. By default, my system is going to use these now instead of the ones that I had before, which I'll change back when I'm done. I need to take this public key and I need to add it to my GitHub account. So what you can do is, and again, this is the public key, so you can give this to anybody and it is secure. So I'm going to do a more ID pub, and all we need to do is take this here. I'm going to copy it. We'll jump to GitHub, go to my profile. I believe it's here. Go to GitHub, come down to settings. We're going to go to SSH keys. So you can see here, I already have two keys here, one for my Mac Studio and one for my MacBook. I'm going to add a new SSH key, drop it right here, add the SSH key. All right. So I'll delete this after, but now if I come back, head back to the playground and we rerun the command that we had, except this time I'm going to come to the code and I'm going to grab the SSH version. I'm going to copy that. Now if I type git clone in the URL, now it's going to ask for that passphrase and now it'll automatically download. Now, if you didn't put a passphrase, it wouldn't ask you for that. So now whether you want to add that or not, it's up to you. It's definitely more secure if you do. But it is a little bit of a pain and asks you that every single time. So now we understand git clone and then also how to set up those SSH keys. And if you're on a PC, it's going to be very similar to these same instructions here. In fact, I think SSH is pre-installed on your computer. So now the next thing I want to talk about is git ignore. So what git ignore does is that any file that is in your git ignore will be ignored when you commit anything or when you do a status. So let's do a ls here. We go into thumbnail magic and let's go ahead and do an ls-la. And what that does is it shows us all of the files, including the hidden files. And on a Mac, anything starting with a dot is a hidden file. And you can see here we have a git ignore file. So if I go into VS Code and let's just open up Playground, Thumbnail Magic, and then we open up our git ignore, you can see we have all of these files here that are being ignored. And the reason why we have this is because there's some files that you do not want in your repository. And the most important is passwords. And where are you going to find passwords? In environment files. So one of the things that we do is that we add all of the files we do not want in the Git repository under any circumstance to the git ignore. And then even when we come here to, and I'm going to show you this command in a minute, but if we were to do a git status, we're going to see that there's no changes. And I'm going to use a command called touch, which just creates a new file. So now if I do a git status, we're going to see it's got an untracked file here called newfile.txt. But if I were to type touch.env, and now I do a git status, well, notice that that's not showing up here because it's part of the git ignore. And so you really want to add all of the files, like caching files that are created just to maybe run your application, but they have no business being inside the repository itself. You want to put all of these files here. Now, when you're working with Claude Code, you could actually say, hey, can you build me a git ignore and put all the very common files in there? Help me build that out, and it will do that. So you can see here, most of this was added here for me by Claude Code along the way. But now you understand what the git ignore file does is it just makes sure that any of these files that you put here cannot be added into the repository and then ultimately showing up here in the repository here. Because if you put some secure password in your .env and then you upload it into the GitHub repository and then somebody else comes along and downloads it, well, they just downloaded all your passwords. Now let's talk about git status. You've seen me use this a couple times. What this does is it simply tells you the status of the repository at any given time. So what you're going to find is that what Git is really good at doing is it's able to track files, how they're different, when they were checked in. And we'll go over this, so don't feel like you have to understand everything that I'm saying. But it's just giving you a status of the current directory. So you can see in this case, we have a untracked file, the new file.txt. It is not in the repository. It has not been staged, and we'll talk about these different things. But status is just giving you a understanding of the status of that folder and the repository at any given moment. And we'll use this a bunch of times throughout the rest of this video, so you'll get a much better understanding of how to use it. You'll use this one a lot. Now, what the git add file does is it allows you to add a file to the Git repository. So if I were to come back to the terminal and I were to do a git add, now what I'm doing is I'm telling Git, I am going to commit this file. So now I haven't actually committed it, but we're gathering all of the files that we do want to commit. Now, a lot of times you are always going to add all of the files that have changed. That's very common. You make a bunch of changes, you fix a bug, you add a bunch of features or whatever that is, and you just end up adding all of the files that are in this either untracked or changed status. And then you just commit all of those files. But every once in a while, you'll just want to update or change one. And so in this case, what I can do is I can just add new file. And if I do a git status, now we're going to see here that there are changes to be committed and we have a new file here. Now, if I were to touch 1.txt and touch 2.txt, I could also do a git status, and we're going to see a new file. And now we have untracked files, 1.txt, 2.txt, and I could do git add dot, and now it's going to add both of these, git status. And now you can see here I have 3 files to be committed. Now, a git diff, it's going to tell you the current difference between your working directory, and your working directory is anything that has changed from what's in the repository. So at any given time, you have your actual repository when we did our init. Ever since then, when we added these new files, these are not a part of the repository yet. They are just changes that we've made in this They call it a working directory, okay? So now if I were to do a git diff, well, it's actually not gonna show anything yet because we haven't committed anything. Or it might also just be because these files are empty. Let's just double check. Just put something in here and we'll save it. Do a git diff again. So the reason why it wasn't showing anything was because the files were simply blank. But now if I do a git diff, it's showing me that we have files here and there's a difference between what we have locally in this working directory, git status, and notice again, 1.txt is now being marked as not staged for commit, again, because we made a change to it. Again, the git diff is showing us what is the difference between what's in the repository from our working directory that has not been committed. And it's just basically showing us this one particular file, and then also that this file has test in it. So you can see it says plus test. So the diff is always going to show you what's the difference between the working directory and what's actually in the repository. And now finally, what we can do is do a git commit. And what that does is it commits everything that is staged for commit, but has not yet been committed yet. So if we were to commit right now, it would only commit the new files. It would not commit the change that we just made, the test. I know that's a little bit weird because 1.txt is here, but if we were to commit right now, it would commit that original version of 1.txt that did not have test in it. So if we wanted to make sure that got in there, we would have to add this file again. So we could do git add 1.txt. Now we do a git status. And now we're going to see we have all of these here. And now we could do a git commit. And now typically what you do here is you add a message that describes the changes you're making to the repository. That way, if anybody's in the repository here and they look at the commits, there's going to be some sort of message here that explains what happened. Now, some of these messages aren't super helpful because it's just me working on this with updates to the app, remove this file, added notifications, yada, yada, yada. But the more detailed you are here, then when another developer is looking at it, they can say, oh, this is what's in this particular commit. So now from here, I can say added 3 new test files. And I can do a git commit. And then I could do a git status. And what do you think is going to be here? It's empty. There's no changes. Now, the one thing that it is telling you is that your branch is ahead of the origin main by 1 commit. And what is the origin? And we'll talk more about this in a second when we get to push, pull, and remote. But it's basically saying that our working directory here, because if we have GitHub is here. Remember, we cloned it. So now we have a local repository. And then we added a few new files, right? And then we committed that back in. What it's basically saying is that this repository is ahead of this one by 1 commit. That's what it means. And at some point, we can push this back to GitHub, and we'll do that in just a second, but that's what this is telling you. But as far as your local repository and the working directory, they are equal, and that's why it's not listing any files any longer. All right, so now git log is going to show us all of our commits. Okay, so you're seeing the one that I just added, but you're also seeing all the ones that I've done before. So you can see a log of all the commits in that branch. And over time, there's going to be a lot. That's all it does. And it also shows you the commit hash here. So every time you make a commit, it creates this hash so that you can reference this specific commit into the Git repository at any time. It's a unique hash that will always represent the commit that you just made. If I do a git push, it's going to ask for that passphrase. Now, again, if we look at GitHub here and we're in our main branch here, and you can see that there's other branches that you can select from. We haven't gotten to branching yet. But if I go to the commits, the last one was 6 hours ago. I recorded a different video. Now, if I do a git push, put in the passphrase, it's going to push it to the origin, and we'll explain what that means in a second. Now, if I do a refresh here, we're going to see that it now has that commit here, added 3 new files. But now remember, if I come back here, remember I created this other one before I pushed it. Check this out. If I do a git log, it's not there. But now if I do a git pull, it's going to pull the most recent changes down. Git pull. Now you can see it pulled in those new files. Git log, there it is. Okay. One thing that's important is our remotes. Because if you remember what I was saying before is that Git is a local tool. So what is actually connecting this local directory with this remote repository? Because they're actually different. They're not the same repository. We just happen to copy one repository into another with a git and a push. But I could create a new repository. We'll just call it delete me. So I remember to delete it later if I do a repository. I now have a repository here that is empty. So what is really connecting thumbnail magic pull or thumbnail magic to some remote repository? Well, it's these remotes. And there's also this concept of origin, which is like the home base, so to speak. You could have multiple remotes. So I could potentially, on my Mac, I could have this repository and I could have remote 1 and remote 2. So remote 2 might be delete me and remote 1 might be that thumbnail magic, okay? So now if I type git remote -v, it's gonna show all of the different remotes that I have. And when it's the origin, that means it's gonna be default. So if I don't put a specific remote, it's gonna assume origin is the default, okay? And you can see there's a fetch and a push. So the pull and the push. So you could actually have a repository. Now, I've never actually done this, but I could have a repository on my Mac. I could have 2 different repositories on GitHub, repository 1 and repository 2. And I could use one for pulling and then another for pushing. I'm sure there's a good reason to do that at some point. I've never needed to do that, but you could separate the 2. That's why you have a fetch and a push, okay? Now, one thing I want to mention here is that, because I haven't touched on this, is that you can use Claude Code to mess around with some of this stuff. So I have Claude Code here and we just covered git remote. So if I wanted to add a new remote, let's say, remember we have delete me, I can come here, I can grab this SSH key and I could type git remote add and then the name. So I've got the origin, which is the default essentially. So I'll put a different name, other name, and then I could put the URL and that's going to add it. So I could do a git remote -v and we're going to see here, I've got another remote here. It's not the remote origin, but it's a different remote. So now I could do a git push other name. It's going to ask for the passphrase and it's going to push it up and check it out. Here it is. Okay. I had to put other name though. Remember before when it's the origin, I can just say git push and origin is basically default. Now keep in mind, if you ever forget any of these commands, you can use Claude Code to do this. So in this case, let's remove the remote. Please use git to remove other name as a remote from GitHub, and we'll put the URL here as well. So you can see here, it's just going to run that command, say yes. So even though I'm kind of showing you how to do things on the command line, I actually do a lot in Claude Code now. So if we come back to the command line, we do a git remote -v, we're back to just these 2 origins. So now let's talk about git branch. So far when we do a git status, we've mostly been on the main branch. So if you're working by yourself, you're working on one feature at a time, there's all sorts of best practices. You're going to run into all sorts of technical people that tell you what to do, but you can develop everything on the main branch. It's not the end of the world. When you have a bunch of developers, bunch of different features, it can get way more complicated, but there are going to be other times that you want to branch off. And what does branching mean is, well, we have this repository. Let's go back to thumbnail magic here. So we have these different branches. Well, what it allows you to do is, let's say we have our main and we have 3 new features that we want to implement, feature 1, 2, and 3. And they're all going to be implemented at the same time by different people. Well, if they were all trying to work on the main branch at the same time, well, there could be lots of conflicts, right? Like one person modifies one file and the other person does another file. They're all trying to push all these things together. My changes are going to affect your changes. So what they have is this concept of branching. And so at any time I can take the main branch and I can say, I want to create a new branch. It's going to create a mirror of it. And then I can work in that branch. And then once I'm done, I can actually merge it back in. Okay. So let's see how that works. So we can do git branch, and there often is some conventions here. So I'm going to go ahead and use feature/test feature. And now what I did is I just created a branch. So if I do a git log, what that means is it's going to branch off from this commit hash. Okay. And you can actually see it here. But now if I do a git status, I'm still in main. So I'm not quite done. I need to do a git checkout feature/test feature. Now, if I do a git status, we're in that new branch. Okay. Touch new file for feature.txt, git status. Again, now there's that untracked file, but I'm in this new branch. Now I can do the git add, new file, git commit, my message, added new file to new feature, right? Git status, git log. Here's our old commit where we branched off from, and now we've got a new commit. So now if we look here, this was main, we created the new feature, we got feature 1 here. If we went back to main, we're gonna be here, okay? So git checkout main, git status, we're back in git status. Now if I do a git log, we just have the added 3 new test files. We don't have our change there. But now what we could do is now we have main branched off to feature 1. Now I can merge that back into main by just doing git merge feature test feature, and it just merged it back into main. Git status, we're in main, git log, add new file to new feature. So that's what we did. We had our main, created the new feature, made the commit, went back into main, and we pulled it back in. We merged that back in. And you can merge back and forth between different ways. There's different strategies around this. It gets a little confusing, so don't worry too much about it. There's different ways of doing it depending on your workflow. I could be in this feature branch and I could pull in some other feature. Maybe you're working on something and I need to see that. So it's real flexible. You can merge all these different things in different ways. That'll become more clear when you're actually using it, but you need to know the command in general. So now what stash does is this is pretty handy because let's say I make a change here, touch another file, .txt, git status. Now we have this untracked file here. For some reason, I wanted to jump back to that other branch. Git checkout. Remember, we already created the branch, but what if I want to just check it out and go back to it? Checkout feature / test feature. Well, I can't do that, probably because I misspelled it. Git checkout feature / test dot feature. Actually, it's letting me do it, but if I do git checkout main, now if I were to do git add another file and then try it again and do a git status, we're going to see I'm in test feature, but it brought my another file here, which we don't really want. So I can do git checkout main, git status. I can do git stash. So it's going to record everything temporarily. And now if I were to do a git checkout feature / test.feature and do a git status, notice it didn't bring that file along with me. So what stashing lets you do is it's basically when you're working on 2 branches and you want to switch back and forth between them, but you don't want the file that you're working on here to come to here when you go back and forth. You can stash it and then you can move over. It's not going to be there. And then you can move back and then end up working with it a bit later. A little bit more of an advanced feature, but you'll run into that from time to time. Now, what git reset does is if I'm ever in a repository, git status, and let's go back to git checkout main, git status. Now, if I were to do a touch test2.txt, git status, and now let's say I wanted to add this file, I do a git add test2. Now I have a git status and we can see it's ready to commit. Now, if I realize, oh wait, no, I don't want that in there, and I did a git reset, git status, you can see it popped it back out again. So there's the git reset, which is great, but the file is still there. If you do a git reset, it just pops whatever was staged back out. But now if you do a git reset hard, it's going to literally push this working directory back to what's in the repository. Git status. Now, in this case, it's untracked, but if I did git add test2, and then I did a git reset hard, git status, you can see it deleted it. So if it's purely untracked, when you do a git reset hard, it won't remove it. But if it's staged, like it was here, and then you do a git reset hard, and you'll find yourself needing to do this sometimes. You'll pull down a repository, you'll make a bunch of changes in your working directory, and you'll do a bunch of work, and then you'll realize, oh wait, I just did so much stuff. I just want to get rid of it. If you did a git reset, well, it's going to still have all those files there, but if you just did a git reset hard, you can pull it right back to where you were and start over without all of those files there. So then there's git reset hard, and then there's also giving it a specific commit. So if you don't put the hash it just always goes to the top. So remember, if I do a git log, this is our most recent commit, this hash here. Now, if I do a git reset or a git reset hard, it pulls me right back here. So remember, git reset just pops anything that's staged back out. Hard deletes anything that is staged, pulls it back to this hash. But now let's say I wanted to go here. This is where it's pretty cool. So now I can grab this hash here and I can say git reset hard, and I can give an actual hash. And now if I do a git log, now I pulled it right back. So this is like going back into the past. So let's say I'm working in main, pulled it down, and I actually want a working directory to pull a previous commit. So git reset and git reset hard are going to pull me back here. Git reset hard with a specific commit hash will pull me back to some previous version that I can work from. So that's going to help you out in 99% of most of the situations you're going to run across. If you're interested in joining a group of committed vibe coders, check out my new group. It's an engaged group of builders. Inside the classroom, you're going to find a course on building your own SaaS. And it also includes a framework you can just download so that you can accelerate your ability to launch your SaaS. It's going to come with everything that you need. I've got a course on API development. We've got support calls and a call where you can meet up with other members. I'd love to see you there. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one.